Gute Woche. Thanks for joining us. And I'd like to, before we start, first of all, wishes to a Mazel Tov to one of our very regular participants from Ori Hasodeh, Reb Mendel Safrin, on the birth of Einekol to his son Yosef Chaim. And on the other side, also one of our regular participants who's not here tonight, is to Reb Avrami Kievman, who on his passing of his father, Reb Baruch Kievman, Alav Shalom, who those who remember in the mid-60s, he was one of our, he lived here, was a Malamed over here, and so we wish him in the Amokim Nachem Oisoi, Mesoch Sharvei Tzir in Yerushalayim. Okay, so Baruch Hashem, people are following the shir, and there's a recording going out, and so I get the feedback from someone who's saying that he understands the apprehension about Paras Mapa Mekadesh. There's a shliach somewhere in the United States, and he wants to do the Purim Suda close to Shabbos, overflowing into Shabbos. But he was thinking, how about avoiding having challah and just having other foods without solve anything? So I wrote back to him, I'm sorry, that's not going to be a solution, because number one, you have a mitzvah of on Shabbos to have challah, to have a lechem. But it's so you have a mitzvah to eat bread for Shabbos, for Sudas Shabbos. The main thing of the Suda is the lechem, and therefore you cannot do away with having lechem and Kabbat Shabbos. The other thing is that the whole svara was the svara samachmirim going back a couple of weeks ago was that the actual Suda constitutes a hefsek, and it interrupts between the recital of Kiddush. At that time, whilst you're reciting Kiddush, you weren't able to say, to eat anything. You weren't allowed to eat anything. That makes that moment a hefsek. Now, that's going to be a hefsek and cutting off the, shall we say, the continuity of your bracha, whether it's for hamotzi or whether it's for potatoes or rice or meat, it doesn't matter. Anything which is included with the hamotzi at the beginning of the meal, so this kiddush in the middle of the meal is going to cut short that hemshech. You're going to have to make a new bracha. So that's not a solution. And he would say that, and we gave another solution, and that was that if someone wants to avoid the shaila of Paras Mapa Mekadesh, if he has one member of the family will eat Sudas Purim earlier in the day, come towards the evening when everyone's sitting down for Sudas Purim, won't wash. That person won't wash because and they don't need to, because they've already had Sudas Purim earlier, and they'll come the right time by Shkia, whatever it may be, and whoever makes Kiddush, and then this individual who didn't wash will now wash and make hamotzi to be motzi everyone Mishram Sofik, and that doesn't seem to be a problem. Okay, let's go on to the next question, which is a girl. This was a girl who's in Eretz Yisrael, I'm guessing. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so the second thing here, so the question here is, she is in a seminary, and Minhag in Eretz Yisrael is, at the seminaries they have very often Shabbos off, and she wants to go to her grandparents who live also in Eretz Yisrael. Problem is, her grandmother is away, she wants to come with a friend. Well, that represents us a problem of yichud, and so she's asking two friends. So just to explain, yichud with a man with two women is also. By night, when, let's say, even if she would come with two friends, so then if she goes to sleep, so then she's no longer a shomer. So what's left is the man with the two girls. So we're still left with a problem of yichud. If there would be four girls, herself and three friends, that would eliminate the question of yichud, because once there's other, a few people who might, even though they're all sleeping, but there's always the anxiety that the one who is sleeping may not really be asleep, and therefore with 4, that would be an acceptable deterrent for yichud. Let's move on. This I got a question from a teacher who's teaching halacha apparently in somewhere in this country, and she's asking, one of the several questions is, from what age should boys and girls from separate families be discouraged from playing together? So I can just quote, my wife says very many times in the name of her Zeder, Ingelach mit Ingelach und Medelach mit Medelach. It should be, keep separate. Little boys should be playing, boys should play with boys and girls should play with girls. From what age should this be introduced? So let's go one thing at a time. First of all, we have here from Sefer Chassidim. We have here from Sefer Chassidim, who says that Sefer Chassidim is from about 700 years ago, one of the Baalei HaTosfos. And so he writes, Al ta'arev bonim uvonois, don't mix boys and girls, pen yachtiu, lest they will come to sin. Oz tismach besula b'mochel levadam. As it quotes a posuk, then the besula, the virgin, will rejoice with the timbrel on their own. Aval bachurim uzakenim yachtov. But bachurim uzakenim, young men and older men can rejoice together. V'chein yelodim v'yelodos misachakim b'rchoy v'yiseho. We have a pasuk in Zechariah. There will be yelodim, boys and girls, playing in the streets. So he explains yelodim levad, v'yelodos levad, yingelach on their own, and medelach on their own. V'chein b'soif tilim, we have the pasuk which we say every day in davening, bachurim v'gam b'sulois, zukenim neorim. So he doesn't say bachurim in b'sulois. Bachurim v'gam b'sulois. Boys, lads will will rejoice on their own, and b'sulois will rejoice on their own. Zukenim neorim, then that's okay. Whatever that last line means. But anyway, we have this emphasis of having separation. And if you think about how much the Jewish community at large is spending, the Frum community is spending to have separate schools, and because it's so important to us that there should be this separation, and for parents to allow their children to play with other children indiscriminately, without being sensitive to this, they are actually they're causing they are kind of pulling the rug from under this whole zahiras, this whole careful expenditure and effort for Kedushas Am Yisrael is lost by being careless about it. So I just want to use this opportunity to encourage this business of get meidlach and meidlach, yingelach mit yingelach. And if you want to ask what age, so in the Niti Gavriel, which you have on the sheet, so Niti Gavriel has got a sefer on Yichud, and there he gives he says approximately from the age of 6. That's what he was recommended. Someone's suggesting v'gam in the posuk legrabas noshim. Aha, b'churim v'gam b'sulois. Aha, v'gam is noshim. Okay, thank you. Let's move on. Okay, so someone sent me this news item. It's in the which I think it's in the Manchester paper, and talking about kashrus supervisors zooming on bugs. And if you can see down, the lab has a digital microscope which provides up to 1,000 times magnification, and they're offering their services to the community. And so what exactly does that mean? We have to be worried about such minute presences in food. And so let's take this carefully. So the next thing we're going to have here is a quote from the Sefer Aruch HaShulchan in Yeridea Siman Pei Dalet. So he says, "Yesh mi shekosav b'shem chachmei hateva." There are those who've told me who have written in the name of scientists, whatever the exact term is, hamistakel b'chuschuchas hamagdelis. If you use a magnifier, shekoyin shpaktiva, I'm not sure whether it's a magnifying glass or a microscope, and you look in chometz, in vinegar, you'll see it's full of bugs. And no one worries about eating vinegar. Are you drinking vinegar? Yeah. Because, he goes into detail on that. Then he says, I heard that with water, especially rainwater, it's full of tiny little creatures, but you can't see them with the naked eye. I heard from someone who had said he checked hundreds of times, thousands of times in water, and there's all different types of things in water. How do we drink water? And he says that the Torah didn't forbid something which the eye does not see, because the Torah was not given to Malochim. And because actually, he says, the scientists will tell you that the air is also full of tiny little creatures, tiny creatures. And when you open your mouth, you're swallowing loads of them. But it's a garnish, he says. If it's something which the eye cannot see, it's not an issue. Omnom b'ma yochel lirois, that's the second last line, that which the eye can see, afilu neged hashemesh, even if it's only visible in sunlight, not doesn't mean mamish direct sunlight, that's actually blinding a bit. It means just neged hashemesh. Afilu dak min hadak, have a sheretz gomik, if it can be very, very small, and that's called a sheretz. I picked up this evening, I have a sefer called Bedikas Hamozon Kahalocha from Reb Moshe Vai, who's one of the contemporary experts in the whole business of checking for bugs. So he writes here the following: according to experts in optica, in optics or whatever, so a person who has a regular good eyesight, from a meter away, he can see a dot the size of 0.3 of a millimeter. And from the distance of 10 centimeters, you can see a dot, which is the size of 0.003. One could see. So what does this tell us? That sometimes you have things which are very, why do you need to have magnifying glass? If you cannot see anything, then you're okay. If you do see something, a small dot, but you don't know what it is, that's when you do have a chiyuv to check it out. And that's what these magnifiers are for. So I don't know whether the 1,000 times magnification, I didn't work out the maths, but the issue is more, if you do see something, then you do have a chiyuv to check. Someone's writing here. Let's take a look at the comments over here. Why do rabbis use magnifiers to look at their ears? Okay, so the answer is that when you see something and you're not sure, and so the magnifier helps you confirm what you're seeing. And then sometimes it really is, there's a dramatic change between what you see before the magnifier and after magnifier. But often you'd also be able to establish it's just a fiber and not something biological. So it helps, but it's not, that's not the main issue. Someone's writing, there was a mice in New York some years ago finding microscopic creatures in the tap water, and some people went to the extent of installing special filters in these. Of course, the answer to that is that the ones who were machmir were saying that the creatures in the water were visible to the naked eye. And that's really what the whole issue was about. But if it's not visible to the naked eye, then it's not a problem. Okay, let's go on to something easier. When it comes to bugs, it's such a difficult field, and it changes from country to country, and et cetera, et cetera. Very difficult field. Okay, and it's very serious. It's to dismiss it out of hand, it would be not very clever. Okay, In the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, he goes into details about this. Is someone sent me a list of questions about tzitzis, someone at Israel, and so the Alter Rebbe in the Shulchan Aruch does not say what size is the minimum size for tzitzis. But then the Alter Rebbe, in his lifetime, published a Siddur. The Shulchan Aruch was published posthumously. In the Siddur, he published halachas, and there's a compendium of halachas on tzitzis. So if you see the first line, a person who's God-fearing should wear tzitzis and should wear talis cotton and should be open from the sides and shouldn't have any sleeves. And then he goes on that it should be an amor wide, and it should be an amor, a square amor in the front, a square amor in the back. And then towards the end over here, it says, Ubozeh mekayim ha-mitzvah divrei hakoil. So I want to emphasize this. The Alter Rebbe is not, there are different opinions. He's not saying that the other opinions don't exist. He's saying that to be yotzel divrei hakoil, then it has to be an amor in the front and amor in the back. There are shittas which allow us, which say a smaller amount is good enough. The Alter Rebbe wants to be divrei hakoil. Then the Alter Rebbe says, "Ubikdanim shehigiu lechinuch." A child who's the age of chinuch, the hainu ben sheish shonim, from 6 years old until ben yud gimel to 13. One can rely on the opinion who says that's enough an amor bilvad. So realistically speaking, what the Alter Rebbe is saying here, very, very few people follow. The simple reason is that the width of the shoulders of a child is less than an amor. It's about half an amor, whatever. And so to have a talis cotton, which is so much wider than the child, is going to be very uncomfortable for the child. And so I don't know of anyone actually today who follows this guidance of the Alter Rebbe of the talis cotton of a child being amor al amor. Now, then the question is, actually even Reb Chaim Noah, who lived 60 years ago, says he hasn't seen people being machmir to have such a width for a child. So then the question is, if so how can you allow a child to make a bracha? It's possibly going into a question of a bracha levatola, because it's not fulfilling, the child is not fulfilling the mitzvah. So I don't see it such a big issue, because as I said, the Alter Rebbe is not saying that's the only, well, on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe is giving this psak that one should be in Israel. So, okay, so that's the question. The Alter Rebbe says it should be amor al amor, and it's not. So how you allow the child to make a bracha? So there's a sefer from Rav Hendel, the Rav of Chabad in Migdal HaEmek, and he writes a svara that like a malamed is teaching children. And so when he's teaching children, he can say brachas as he's teaching the children. So when a child who doesn't have a full-size talis cotton is making a bracha, so look at it as training. It's training to say the bracha. Okay, I'm a little bit not totally confident with that, but fine. Okay. Why am I not confident? Because how long does it take to train? To say that for years, the boy, every time he makes a brachas and the tzitzis is training, I'm more inclined to say we'll be relying on the lenient opinions that it can be a smaller shir pasha, because it's children. It's very important that a child should be comfortable with the tzitzis. We don't want that the child should feel he has to wear this thing which he's uncomfortable with, because that can have also chas v'shalom a negative consequence. Let's go and look at your comments over here. I'm going to read through. So I'm told K.L. Badi has a mashgiach who has extremely good eyesight. He's also a jeweler, has been able to spot bugs with his naked eyesight that other experienced mashgichim did not. Ilan Grossman asked Dein Ernst, sein gesund. What's the halacha in this case? So in other words, some people can see, some can't see. Dein Ernst said that when this mashgiach is doing the bedikah, then the bug is a bug. When another mashgiach is doing the bedikah and doesn't spot the bug, then it doesn't exist. Okay. There is a fascinating lashon of the Alter Rebbe in Yeridea Simon Kuf Tzadik. And it says, HaTorah livnei odom nitno, v'loi le'etzim ve'le'avonim. Something on those lines to say the Torah was not given to stones and wood. The Torah was given for people. And in a sense, the shaila only becomes a shaila when it's asked by a person. So that seems to be the svara, similar which Radhain Entres or Homner Refuah Shleimah, what he's saying here, that it sounds a bit strange. It seems to be not objective but subjective. Yes, and when this person can see it, so then it exists. If the other person cannot see it, then it doesn't exist. Yeah, that's possibly true. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Wrapping the shamash around the tzitzis, clockwise or anti-clockwise. I must admit that until Friday, when I started looking at this question, I'd never really paid attention that there's any question about which way. And we all know that there's a difference between Ashkenaz and Sfardi, which way one twists the ritzuas of the tefillin around the arm. The Ashkenazi minhag is to roll the ritzuas inwards, and the Sfard minhag is to roll the ritzuas outward. Some poskim say that this has got to do with turning to the right or turning to the left. Think of the Ashkenaz way of pulling towards yourself. So in a sense, it's like turning to the right. And so this posuk says that Dafka should follow the minhag Ashkenaz, because when you're meant to be turning, you should be taking a right turn rather than a left turn. And that is going clockwise. Wait a second. In this context, it's clockwise.
Depending if for you or for the onlooker.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got here different shittas. Which way? By the tefillin. But my take on this is that since in Amin Hogim and Mroiv Mechabrim don't say a word about which way to twist the tzitzis, so just relax. It doesn't make any difference. That's my take on it. Okay, although there are mahadrim, so fine. There's the Torah is big and there's room for everyone, but fine. I want to address here something else, a bit more in detail, and that is here you have on the picture you have 4 styles of wrapping tzitzis, and let me explain something. There's a concept called chulyos, which means rings, but it's units, and in the Gemara, in the Menachos, Bryce or whatever, it says hapoiches lo yivchos mishiva mosheva hamoisif lo yosef yad yud gimel, to have at least 7 chulyos, 7 units, or to have maximum to have 13. 7 corresponding to the 7 heavens, and 13 is the 7 heavens, which including the spaces in between them. So now you're going to ask, what's the tzitzis got to do with the heavens? Well, if you look in Rashi in Chumash, in the end of Parshas Shalach, he says tcheles, rakia, etc. That the tcheles is to remind you of the rakia. So therefore, it is very apropos that in the tzitzis we have that connection with the inyan of the rakia. Now, so then we don't have even 7 chulyos. We only have 4 chulyos. So Meforshim say that was in the times of when they had tcheles. Then they would have 7 or up to 13 chulyos. Now we don't have tcheles, so therefore we keep to just 4 chulyos, and then there's different ways. But the way we do it is 7, 8, 11, and 13. So you can see the top picture: 7 circuits, 8 in the second one, 11 and 13, and altogether that makes up 39. But so then there's a Chabad style of making the tzitzis, and in this there's some variations. So the second picture is the typical Chabad style of every 3 circuits, then one kind of pulls it tight. And there's one threads it through and pulls it tight, and then another 3, and then you pull it tight, and so on. So I don't know how well this is going to work on the Zoom, but I've prepared some tzitzis over here from an old talus. Where's my camera? Can you see anything? Okay, so what we have over here is you've gone round 3 times and then pulled it. And then that.
I'm asking if you stop presenting, then we can see your picture larger.
Okay, fine. So there we are. So so we have this idea of it going around 3 times and then being pulled tight. According to Tosfos, that is called the kesher. Let's just mute that.
I'm trying to mute myself.
Thank you. Okay, so according to the way we make our ksharim, we make 5 sets of double knots at each, double knot here, double knot here, double knot here, 5 double knots. According to the Mordechai from Bali Tosfos, by doing 3 around one another and then pulling it tight, that's a kesher. So you already achieved a kesher with that. Similar, like you think about the lulav, you wrap around and you pull it tight, that's also counted as a kesher. In that way, in Minhag Chabad, where we've got, now if we're going to forget about the double knots in between, imagine they don't exist. We've got here 39 circuits, which means 13 sets of 3. Each one of them is got a kind of kesher. So by having those 13 circuits, 13 chulias, we've fulfilled that which it says the Gemara of Hapoiches Hamoisif Lo Yosef Al Shloishes. So we've got the 13 circuits. In this, there was a time where they did it different to the way we do it today. The common way which is done is what you see over here, the second drawing. It looks like in the times of the Rebbe Rashab and earlier, they did a without doing this, pulling it tight each time, they would just pass through the thread, do 3, pull the thread between the 3 and the 4 loose strings, and then continue. So they would make a distinct separation between every 3, but not with a secured type of knot. That was how it was done till then. And then there was, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, perhaps, the name Chonya Morozov. Chonya Morozov, he came up with this idea of doing this securing knot, which is followed in Chabad today. So again, they used to have a way of separating each 3 by passing the shamus between the 3 and the 4 threads, between each set of 3, between each chulia. Reb Chonya came up with an idea of separating each 3 by securing it, similar the way to some Sfardim do it, of securing by pulling the thread through on itself. Now, then there is another way, which kind of is a combination of the two. And that is between every 3, which you secure the 3, and then you pull the thread through and then do the next group, and so on. So my Zayda Olav Shalom had heard about this, and he was keen to that was his nature, trying to find out, get to the bottom of things. So he prepared such a talis cotton with this kind of tzitzis, and he presented it to the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe, right or wrong. And so the Rebbe sent him out. The Rebbe did not give him a committal answer, like Shach L'Rav or something, and he gave him also $18, thanking him for the talis cotton. So what now? I didn't know I knew the thing with my Zayda. Then years later, I heard this thing about Mendel Morozov about his father. So now I understand what's going on here. It is important to us that every 3 rings should be separate from the next 3 rings. There is that emphasis. But which way they should be separated, whether it's through the thread going through, or because each one is secured separately, that is not so essential. So long as there is each 3 should be separate. I want to just add, I wrote about this years ago in the Kfar Chabad, and this is about, not Kfar Chabad, in the Hiskashrus journal, and then a couple of people told me how they had also been taught in a similar way to what my Zayda taught me. But then one person told me that the person who made the tzitzis for the Frierdiker Rebbe was told that when you do the chulyas, so the 1 and the 2, yeah, in the first set there's 3, 3, 1, and then it goes 2, 3, 3. So the 1 and the 2 should be as close to the kesher as possible, because if they are essentially one chulya. And similarly, in the third one and the fourth one, he ends off the 11 ends off with 2, and the 13 starts with the 1. So that 2 and 1, those 2 and 1 should be as close as possible to the kesher, so that they should be as close to as possible to one another. Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify on the tzitzis.
Sorry, it's been hard for me to type. Rabbi Greenglass showed me his tzitzis, and they have the loop, the chulias, on both sides, not just one loop going on the side, on both sides. And he said that Chanya Morozov did that for the Frierdiker Rebbe like that.
Okay, you'll have to share us a photograph of it if you have such a sample. All right, or I'll meet you next. You'll explain to me. It's one of these things that's just difficult to even with a picture. It's a bissel schwer. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this is a shaila which I got mamish on Friday. Debische geholfen. I was worried whether I'll have enough material for the shir. We'll see. The Weil Debische geholfen on Friday. So one of the shluchim here in the UK, he was preparing. Baruch Hashem, he has 3 Sifrei Torah, and as he's rolling the Sifrei Torah to the right place, and that's as we know, it's an important thing. It says that you're not allowed to be goyel Sefer Torah but tzibur. I'm saying this, I know I've said it before, but it's important that one should not keep the tzibur waiting. It's disrespectful for the congregation to keep them waiting whilst you are getting your act together, and so you should be rolling the Sefer Torah in advance. There are those there's old Ashkenaz minig, which would that they would do it actually in the morning during Psukei de Zimra, and it was called chipusim. In other words, finding the right place in the Sefer Torah. That was done during. I just find it very difficult how a Yekish mind could cope with this kind of thing going on in the middle of davening. I don't know, unless I'm more Yekish than the Yekis. I would find it very, very disturbing if it's done in the middle of davening. So it's meant to be done in advance, and so he did the right thing. He was doing it in advance on Friday, and as he's rolling the Sefer Torah, so one seam comes apart, or perhaps he found it was already partly torn, and so he rolled it on further. It wasn't the place where he needed it for Kriyas HaTorah, but he asked, is he allowed to use that Sefer Torah for Shabbos morning, where he needs to have 3 Sefer Torah, because we had Meshpotim and Chodesh and Shkolim. So here we have, this is in Hilchos Sefer Torah, Simen Reish Ayin Ches, Sefer Gimel. Im Nikra Roiv Tefira, Shebein Yeriah LeYeriah, if most of the stitching between one sheet of parchment and the next has been torn, Va'adayin Mechubaros, but they are still attached, Bechomesh or Sheish Tfiris, and they're still attached with 5 or 6 stitches, Shel Kayoma, permanent stitches, kosher. So the Mechaber has said, so long as you've got a minimum of 5 or 6 stitches, so then you're okay. Now, the story which I asked the Shliach then, he said it was actually a little bit more than halfway. I didn't ask him to start counting how many stitches, but because what you have at the bottom here is the Taz. To resolve on the commentary and on the Shulchan Aruch, he disagrees with the Mechaber. He disagrees with the Shulchan Aruch. who's the Shulchan Aruch is based on the Trumas Hadesh, and he disagrees with this, and he says no, it has to be mechuber, roiv, it has to be majority attached. In order to be called a sefer, it has to be majority attached, and if not, you're not allowed to read with it, read from it. Then that's the Taz, and then the other side of the page, you've got the Shach. The Shach has a later addendum which he calls Nekudas HaKesef, dots of silver. And in Nekudas HaKesef, he argues with the Taz, and he supports the position of the Shulchan Aruch, and therefore he says you are allowed to. That if there are 5 or 6 stitches, you are allowed to. The Poyol, if they would have only the one Sefer Torah, then it would perhaps be a need to be more lenient. Here, Baruch Hashem, they had 2 other Sefer Torah, and also to roll from Mishpatim to Shkolim is not a big tircha, it's a few seconds. Therefore, I told him he shouldn't use that 3rd Sefer Torah because it's certainly not unanimous. It's interesting. So, where does it come that there's 5 or 6 stitches? Well, what's the cheshbon of 5 or 6? So, someone to bring various sources, lagabi tumah v'tare. You have, if a garment is torn, does it lose its tumah? So then other Meforshim say, what's it got to do with tumah v'tare? Here, it's not by the Sefer Torah. It's not just it has to be one sefer. There are directives. That stitching has to be done dafka with sinews. It's not just that they have to be one. It has to be joined in a particular way, and therefore it has to be joined. In the majority, it has to be joined. That's what some Meforshim say. Then there's a Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer is quoted on the page in the Shulchan Aruch. Chassam Sofer, he has an interesting explanation. Tell me, is it 5 or 6? Why is the Mechaber like ambiguous? Make up your mind. So he says the minimum amount of stitches on a page, on a seam, the minimum is 10. So 5 or 6. The question is, if there are 6 stitches, that means it's mostly sewn. If there are 5 stitches, it's not mostly sewn, but it's not mostly separated either. It's like borderline. Is the emphasis it has to be mostly sewn? Then you have to have 6 stitches. If the emphasis it mustn't be mostly separated, then 5 stitches is also not mostly separated. That's some Sofer's analysis of the words of the Mechaber. But then just another factor in all of this is that if it would be not in the same sefer, I didn't ask that detail, as again because I didn't feel the need to be makel when you have 2 other svarim there and minimum tircha de tzibura. If it had been in another sefer, there's more reason to be makel, because it says in the Gemara, why don't we ein koyrim b'sefer ein koyrim b'tzibur b'chumshin mipnei kavod hatzibur? Really, we could have 1 scroll for Breishis and 1 scroll for Shmois and etc. Why don't we do that? And on that basis, we find in various areas of Psulim that if it's in another sefer, another part of the 5 Chemoshim, one is more lenient in these halachas. So that's what Reb Aryeh is writing to me, our in-house sofer. He quotes from the Kesses HaSofer, which is a sefer specializing on Sofras by the Reb Shlomo Gansfield, who's the author of Pitzah Shulchan Aruch. He says, if it's more than half split in Bereshis, it's okay for Kriya in Dvarim. The Kriya is in Bereshis, but all right, thank you for that. But again, I would have to check in the Kesses HaSofer whether he is saying that as a lechatchila, or he's saying that when you don't have another Sefer Torah. At any rate, so then the Shliach got back to me. He says that he accepts the psak, and he was grateful that I was able to show him this psak, but he was a bit concerned because he had hyped up his people. Today is a very special Shabbos, that there's going to be 3 Sefer Torah, and it would be a little bit of a letdown when the people would come and there'd be only 2 Sefer Torah. So could he take out the 3 Sefer Torah, and then it will come to actually which Sefer Torah will be used. He will be able to say perhaps the right expression is to pull the wool over their eyes. They wouldn't notice the difference which one's being actually used. So I wasn't very happy about this because there is a concept of not being matriach a Sefer Torah, not schlepping a Sefer Torah from place to place. It's not respectful. Why? So I made a pshara with him. I said, what you'll do is, at the opening of the Aron Kodesh, all 3 Sforim will be taken out. And then, but when it comes to procession, the 2 will go, the other one will be put back. And at that point, so that's not a major tircha, and then that will be an opportunity for you to educate the people who came to the shul to say that there is a concept of the Sefer Torah has to be sewn in such a way, and I gave him the references. And so see this as an opportunity of educating people the correct way. Okay, let's move on. And there's an expression, Bo l'lamed v'limtzo lamed. You think you're teaching, but actually you're learning also. So Baruch Hashem, through the fact that the shir is being a big audience, Baruch Hashem, live, and then there's a recording. So I'm getting feedback from people who I'm touched that they're listening. At any rate, we had this discussion. If you remember, this picture, it was last week or 2 weeks ago, and whether that passage is a Rishus HaYochid, and we said it's only got 2 walls, so it's not a Rishus HaYochid. And I'd suggested to put a vertical lechi, to vertical pole over here. And so I'd slipped up, actually. I admit I'd slipped up between the dinim of Mavui and the dinim of Chotzer. And they are 2 separate halachas, and Chotzer is stricter than Mavui. And so let's learn this halach in Shulchan Aruch. So this is from Shimon the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, Simon Shion Samach Gimel. Lo hitira begimel mechitzas v'lechi oy echad oy koira te'rechava tefach. The 3 walls and a lechi or koira is only b'movi. A movi is like a long passage, alley. Aval chotzer she'pirutzo b'melua b'ruach revius. Let's say if you have your front yard, maybe we have our houses in London is like a style of bayit vegan. You have a house in the garden. You have the garden in the back, the garden in the front. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem, we have this harchava. So you got your garden in the front of your house. If you have 2 walls on either side of the garden, but the way it meets the pavement is totally open. So there, lechi is not going to be good enough. There, it has to have a pas roch of dalet tefachim, either a panel which is 4 tefachim wide, and then he says it should be on one side of the opening. And if you want to do something on either side of the gap, and provided the gap is less than 10 amas, it doesn't add the detail. In Yitzul atakana b'shnei tzidei de hapirtzo, dai b'shnei pases sheroch b'mashehu, rak she'yeh govam b'yutfachim. It's enough to have 2 strips, which are even minimally wide, and they have to be 10 tefachim high. So back to our passage over here. So then we'd have to have, to make this allowable as a chotzer, we'd have to have on both ends 2 vertical strips on either side. Sorry about that. 2 vertical strips to create one over here and one over here, and the same at the other end. And in that way, you're creating, this area has got 4 mechitzas, and then it will become a Rishus HaYochid. Okay, let's go on to the question which we had. Okay, this is, okay, not there yet. So last week, we had a discussion about a shliach somewhere in Scandinavia needs to employ a new cook, and she's Jewish, but she's not fully Shomer Shabbos, but she would be embarrassed to be violate Shabbos in the presence of the rabbi. We went through the whole discussion. Is that a reason to say that they're not called a Mechal Shabbos Befar Hestia? And if you remember last week, we had a quote from a Sefer saying that it's a difference whether they are violating Shabbos in a Drabonon or with a Deiraisa. If they are violating Shabbos b'Deiraisa, it doesn't help that they will refrain in the presence of Adam Choshev. If they're violating the Rabbonon, then it would be okay. So the Eibishter helps. that the same kind of shaila comes up again this week. So this is again from a different part of the world, also Chabad house, and they have a Jewish girl who is, I don't know, she's living with them, or she's very, very Hamish. She's spending many, many hours with them, and she keeps kosher, and she's starting to keep Shabbos, which means she's not keeping Shabbos at the moment. And they've observed that in their presence, she doesn't violate Shabbos, but they've noticed sometimes she'll go out somewhere and she'll smoke a cigarette. Okay, listen, maybe she'll help. That will also become as dainas nasa. But meanwhile, she's not keeping Shabbos even with the isim in HaTorah. And now, if she wants to cook something in the kitchen, does it become bishul akum? And you have to insist on lighting the fire. And we have to understand this is a very sensitive situation. We don't want to make a person feel that they are being ostracized, are being looked at as a goy. It is a very sensitive thing. So, for one thing, I got Rabbi Zirkin in Western Florida sent me that this distinction between the Rabbon and the Deraisa is actually also brought in the Tzemach Tzedek. In the Tzemach Tzedek, you have it in your in the notes. In Tzemach Tzedek in Avnu Ezer, Soif Simulation and Test. That's the first Shuva in Chelik Gimel of Avnu Ezer. Tzemach Tzedek says this same word, that which we say, if they're embarrassed to do a malacha in the presence of Adam Choshev, they're not called Mechal Shabbos, that's by Yisod Rabbanon. There he's talking about someone who is meant to deliver a get. And someone said that he sits in the shop, he sits in a, anyone here speaks Russian? Kabak. What is a kabak? My impression is that like he would be sitting in the shop, and perhaps he had some kind of kretschmer, like a pub, and he would sit there, and the goyim, he had a goyish worker, a bartender who would be, so they would be actually taking the money, and he would be sitting there. And so he claimed that he doesn't do anything, he's just sitting and watching. So meanwhile, that's part of the discussion over there. But what we're seeing here is that if there's a difference now in this question of Mechal Shabbos, if they're doing a deraisa or the Rabbon. Now, smoking cigarettes is bepashtus and Issa deraisa. Lighting a cigarette, etc., it says Issa deraisa. And so therefore, a bit harder to be makel. Another thing is, last week I mentioned that there's a svara to say that someone who is a servant in your house is not a problem because there's no kirva with a servant. This person's not a servant. This person's like a friend, so to speak. So it makes more of an issue. Now, I got another email from someone who's saying that if the whole reason for Bishul Akum is because of intermarriage, but this woman is allowed to marry into Klal Yisrael, so what's the problem? But this question is already raised in the Piskei Tshuva in the beginning of Hichos Siman Kufyud Gimel, and he dismisses it because Bishul Akum is an earlier Gzeira, and it's also because of for other reasons. Lepoil, that itself is not good enough. So what I did tell the shliach is try to avoid it. That this person shouldn't be doing any cooking on their own. Let's say if she wants to make an omelet for herself for breakfast, you say to her, "Oh, I love making omelets. This is my pastime. You cut the salad and I'll make the omelet for you. Tell me how you like it with mushrooms, etc." But I'm really a specialist in making nice omelets. Find a way in a nice way, but to try to avoid. But the avid one would be makel, but lechatchila to avoid that person doing cooking for themselves on in your house, stuff which would be a question of Bishul Akum. Let's move on. So then also last week, we had the discussion about the minig of plucking grass when leaving a Beis HaChayim. So someone sent me that their Rav Ushpol says there's a difference on the day of when you don't say Tachanun, it doesn't, that minig of plucking grass doesn't apply. So just one thing at a time. First of all, who's Rav Ushpol? Rav Ushpol was a Choshev Rov. He lived in Borough Park. He was a Rov of the Anshe Lubavitch Shul in Borough Park, and he was the Rov of the Chevre Kadisha of Agudas Chasidei Chabad in New York. and he published a manual called Darkei Chesed. And this is a quote from the Sefer Darkei Chesed. And he's talking about Chevra Kadisha stuff. He quotes a Sefer HaChaim, published in Tov Shin Lamed Tes in Zulzbach, in Daf Ayin Tes. And he mentions, there's Oid Kosov Shom, this is the next second quote, when you don't say Tachanun, one doesn't pluck grass. So I was intrigued. I mean, no Sforim, no Jewish Sforim were printed in Zulzbach in Tov Shin Lamed Tes. I'm pretty sure of that. So it's a mistake there. It wasn't Tov Shin Lamed Tes, which was 79. Yeah. So it's a mistake there. So I did, and I was like, I had to get this one. I had to find it. This Sefer Chaim. I found the Sefer printed in Zulzbach in Tov Kuf Nun Aleph, and the paginations are slightly different. So he possibly had a different edition. Well, this is what I found in the Sefer Chaim, which is a Sefer all about Chevra Kadisha stuff, and it says the following: When one doesn't say Tachnun, ein oimrim tziduk hadin, veloy kaddish. One doesn't say tziduk hadin, which is hatzur tomim poloi. When one doesn't say the kaddish, it means the long kaddish. There is a minute which is brought in Shulchan Aruch on the way to the Levaya to stop and start again 7 times. The ein oim din hamita, on a day which one doesn't say tachnun, one doesn't indulge in that. V'yein toil shemasabim v'ein maspidim, and one doesn't pluck grass, and one doesn't say hesped. So why I was bothered about this, and why I was so desperate to find the source for it. We have, Baruch Hashem, people who followed the Rebbe very, very carefully. And they wrote down details. And the Rebbe would go to the oil at least twice a month. And one was on Erev Rosh Chodesh, and one was Tesvav. Erev Rosh Chodesh happens to be the afternoon, Ein Oimrim Tachnun. Tesvav includes Tesvav Shemishvat, Tesvav Ov, which Ein Oimrim Tachnun. The Rebbe also used to go on like Beimer, Ein Oimrim Tachnun. So there are many occasions the Rebbe went when Ein Oimrim Tachnun. And the people who write the observations, what the Rebbe did, they say whenever the Rebbe left the Beis HaChaim, he would be plucking grass. The minig of three times they're throwing over the shoulder. And they never mention that there's a difference between Ein Oimrim Tachnun and what should be the difference. Why should it be a difference between where you aim Tachnun and Ein Oimrim Tachnun? So what we're seeing now, at least in the Sefer HaChaim, that it seems to be on days where they're seeing the plucking grass as part of Ein Oimrim Tachnun, as a part of a Tachnun, an expression of Tsar. So let's take a look now. What you have on the right side of the page, a quote from the Bes Yosef in Siman Shinayin Vov, and he says here, he brings from the Kol Boy when he leaves the Beis HaKforos, one would pull out grass with earth, and you throw it on the head in the way of Tsar. And then it quotes a passage from Eve, how they threw dust on the heads, and then they wash their hands. So what we're seeing is that the plucking of grass is after a levaya would be seen as an expression of Tsar. Then there seems to be a difference between plucking after levaya and then some visiting Beis Olam. And there I mentioned last week, we say the pasuk v'yotzitzu me'ir ke'esav ha'aretz. We say it's more an expression of is an expression of Tsar, but Yotzitzu me'ir ke'esav ha'aretz is an expression of faith in Tchias HaMesim. And therefore, if it's got to do with Tchias HaMesim, so then it's got nothing to do with Ein Oimrim Tachnun. So therefore, that's why I'd like to say that Kvodim ben Koyim Munach, the Darkei Chesed is quoting from a Sefer, and that Sefer is talking in the context of a Levaya. They would be pulling on the offer al Rishon. In their minig, they didn't do it, but in the minig which we have of visiting Beis Olam and plucking grass on the way out, that wouldn't make a difference whether you say Tachnun or not. That's and you came near on Yas Daiti. Yeah. certainly, I mean, the fact that you're going back to this young lady who's going around the corner to smoke a cigarette, of course she's being sensitive. That's very true. But Lepoil, is she a Shema Shabbos or not? There are people on the street who see. All right, let's go our last question, which we have on the list. So last week we've discussed about mitzareh for cotton, b'shas adchak. So if there's leeway to be mitzareh for cotton, why is there no leeway to be mitzareh for women? So number one, to be mitzareh for women would be a question of you have a mechitza, and we have a mechitza for a reason. We have a mechitza for a reason because people have got the Yetzer Tov and the other Yetzer, and they are attracted, distracted, and that's why we have a mechitza. So to have a woman in the room to make up your minyan would be undermining the purpose of having a mechitza. Number one, but I think a more important point, and that is the Torah acquitted a woman from the mitzvahs hasei shehazman grama. Mitzvahs which are time linked. Many of them, there are other exceptions, but most of them, a woman does not have that pressure for the simple reason that she has a mitzvah, the greatest privilege of being mechanech her children, looking after her family. And so then you have a situation, it's a small shtetl, and they're short of a minyan. And it can be 3 times a day, yeah? She's going to be running away from leaving her children, not because they're pressure, she has to be back at the minyan. Leave her alone. She has her greater privilege to bring up her family, and that's the Eibishter gave her that schus and that privilege, and she shouldn't be distracted from her avodas hakodesh to do even such wonderful things as making up minyanim. Let her carry on with her avodas hakodesh undisturbed, and let the men get their act together on their own. Okay, I'll finish off with that and wish you all a gute Woche and a freilichen Ador. It's not only mission nichnas Adar, not only the first day you have to be happy. The Rebbe takes the point that from day to day you have to be moisif in the simcha. So each one of us should find ways of being moisif b'simcha day to day, and moisif oneself and be moisif with the people around us. A gute Woche.
Gute Woche.
Gute Woche.
Gute Woche. Gute Woche.
Dein